It's one of the biggest, most, well, mind-bending questions out there, isn't it? In science, philosophy. What is consciousness?
Absolutely. It's fundamental.
And then right away, you have to ask, how does this whole giant question apply to the animal kingdom? All these other minds out there. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're really going to try and unpack what consciousness means, look at the big scientific ideas about how it even happens.
How the brain does it, yeah.
Exactly. And then we'll take a journey, through the animal kingdom and look at some really surprising evidence of just how diverse minds can be.
It's fascinating stuff.
We've taken your stack of sources, all those articles, research papers, notes, and we're aiming to distill the really key insights, help you get up to speed, thoroughly, and hopefully pretty quickly.
Yeah, cut through the noise a bit.
And what's truly remarkable, I think, is just how much our understanding of animal minds has changed. It really challenges a lot of those old assumptions we had.
Oh, dramatically. The fields exploded.
All right, so consciousness. Before we even get to the animals, we kind of have to wrestle with the word itself, right? What is it? It's actually pretty slippery.
It really is vague.
And philosophers, Ned Block especially, made this really critical distinction. Phenomenal consciousness, P consciousness, versus access consciousness, A consciousness. Can you break that down for us? What's the core difference?
Okay, so P consciousness. That's all about the subjective quality of experience. It's the what it is like part.
The feeling.
Exactly, the raw feeling, like the feeling of pain or, the actual experience of seeing the color red. Not just knowing it's red, but the subjective redness of it, or the smell of a rose.
Right.
Philosophers call these qualia, those private subjective qualities. And this is what David Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness. How does physical stuff in the brain,
like neurons firing,
right, how does that give rise to these subjective feelings? That's the mystery.
Okay, so that's P consciousness, the raw feeling. What about A consciousness then?
A consciousness is defined by its job, its function. Information is aconscious if it's available for you to use.
Use how?
For reasoning, for controlling your actions rationally, or importantly for humans, for telling someone about it, verbal report.
Ah, okay.
So you see a red apple. The info red apple here is aconscious because you can think, should I eat that? Reach for it, or just say, I see a red apple.
Got it. It's accessible.
Exactly. And this connects to what Chalmers called the easy problems. Not that they're easy to solve, but they're about explaining functions, attention, integrating information, memory access, things we can potentially map onto brain mechanisms.
That's a really helpful distinction. So P is the feeling, A is the access or usability. Yeah. But are they actually separate things? Can you have one without the other?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Block definitely argues they are separable, both in concept and maybe even in reality. He uses these thought experiments. Imagine super blind sight. Someone could navigate the world perfectly using visual information, point to things, describe them functionally, but have zero actual visual experience, know what it's like to see.
Whoa, a P zombie.
Exactly, the philosophical zombie. Functionally identical, but lights out inside. No subjective experience. And he also talks about the flip side, maybe A zombies, beings that do have raw feelings, P consciousness, like maybe simple pain.
Like an infant, maybe, or a small animal.
Potentially, yeah, feeling something, but lacking that higher level cognitive machinery to access it for a rational thought or report.
Okay, that zombie idea is pretty wild. But how does someone like Daniel Dennett see this? Does he buy this separation?
Dennett. No, he argues the distinction itself is kind of an illusion, or at least misleading. For him, that phenomenal experience, the what it's like, that just is what happens when information gets widely distributed and influential in the brain.
His fame in the brain idea.
Precisely. So for Dennett, if you study the mechanisms of A-consciousness, how information gets broadcast and used, you are studying P-consciousness. There's no extra magic subjective glow. Solve the easy problems of function, he argues, and the hard problem just dissolves.
So this isn't just philosophers arguing in armchairs then. This distinction, P versus A, it actually shapes how scientists even look for consciousness in animals.
Right.
And who they even think might have it.
Absolutely critical. The whole scientific search for animal minds kind of rests on the possibility. Block raises that P consciousness, that raw feeling, can exist without the complex machinery for human-like A consciousness, especially verbal report.
Because otherwise, if you needed language,
You couldn't even start looking in most species. Block's idea gives the philosophical green light, and that's exactly why things like the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness zeroed in on affective states, feelings, emotions, a type of P consciousness, and linked them to those evolutionarily ancient subcortical brain areas.
not necessarily the big fancy cortex we associate with thought.
Right. Suggesting the foundations of feeling might be much more widespread and evolutionarily older than complex thought.
And just quickly, this whole debate sits within a bigger picture, philosophically. You've got dualism, mind and body are separate things, like Descartes said.
The classic view.
Then materialism, which is kind of the default for science now, everything's physical. Consciousness comes from the brain. But they have the explanatory gap, how physical stuff makes subjective feeling.
A hard problem again, yeah.
And then there's this other idea, panpsychism, which sounds a bit out there but is getting traction. The idea that consciousness isn't just in brains, but maybe it's a fundamental property of matter itself.
Yeah, like mass or charge. It's an old idea, finding new life, partly because some scientific theories we're about to discuss seem to, well, they kind of point in that direction, or at least are compatible with it.
Okay, so we've got the philosophical groundwork laid. Now the science bit. How does the brain actually do it? How does it create experience? Let's get into the big scientific theories, trying to explain the mechanics. We'll focus on the two heavy hitters, Integrated Information Theory, IIT, and Global Neuronal Workspace Theory, GNWT.
Right. So Integrated Information Theory, IIT, this comes from Giulio Tononi, and it makes a really bold claim. Consciousness is basically a system's ability to integrate information.
It is the integration, not just caused by it.
That's the core claim, yeah. It starts from axioms about experience itself, like consciousness exists for itself, it's unified, it's specific, and derives what a physical system needs to have those properties. The key idea is that a conscious system has to have irreducible cause-effect power over its own past and future states. It weaves information together in a way that can't be broken down into independent parts.
Okay, integration, but how do you? How do you measure that? Can you put a number on consciousness using IIT?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting and mathematical. IIT proposes a quantity called phi, symbolized by I. Phi measures exactly that, the amount of irreducible integrated information in a system.
Okay.
If a system, any system, has a phi value greater than 0, IIT says it's conscious. The higher the phi, the more conscious, in a sense. And the specific structure of that integrated information, the shape of the phi structure, determines what the experience is like, the quality of it.
And does this theory point to specific brain areas?
It does make predictions. For humans, IIT suggests a posterior hot zone areas in the back of the cortex is the main seat of consciousness. Its grid-like neural structure seems really good for high levels of integration.
Ah, interesting.
And it also helps explain maybe why the cerebellum, which has like most of the brain's neurons,
Yeah, tons of them.
doesn't seem to contribute directly to conscious experience. Its structure is very parallel, repetitive, not good for integration, so likely very low phi.
But I know IIT is, well, it stirs things up a bit. Why is it so controversial? It sounds quite elegant in a way.
It is elegant, but yeah, controversial. The biggest sticking point for many is that implication you mentioned earlier, a form of panpsychism. Because phi is defined mathematically based on cause-effect structure, anything with the right kind of structure could have phi greater than 0.
Not just brains, like a thermostat or the internet.
In principle, yes, depending on how you calculate it for those systems. And that idea that consciousness could be graded and potentially widespread rubs a lot of neuroscientists and philosophers the wrong way. It's led to some pretty strong criticisms, people calling it meaningless, even pseudoscience.
Wow.
Yeah, the debates get heated. Critics also question how practical it is to actually calculate phi for complex systems like the brain, and whether phi really captures subjective feeling or just complexity.
Okay, so that's IIT consciousness is integrated information measured by phi, potential panpsychism. What of the other big one? Global Neuronal Workspace Theory, GNWT. Sounds different.
A very different approach. GNWT comes originally from Bernard Bars and then fleshed out neuroscientifically by people like Stanislas Dehaene and Jean-Pierre Changeux. It's much more functionalist, it asks. What does consciousness do?
Right. Less what it is, more what it's for.
Exactly. The idea is the brain has loads of specialized, unconscious processing modules working in parallel. Consciousness happens when information from one of these modules gets selected, amplified usually by attention, and then broadcast across a brain-wide network, the global workspace.
Like shining a spotlight on stage in a theater.
That's the classic analogy, yeah. The information on the lit stage becomes available to a huge audience of other unconscious specialist systems throughout the brain. That availability is consciousness, functionally speaking.
So where is this workspace in the brain? Is it one spot?
Not really one spot. It's thought to be a distributed network of neurons, particularly long-range neurons, connecting distant brain areas, especially in the prefrontal and parietal cortex higher-level association areas.
Yeah.
And the key event in GNWT is called ignition. When information becomes conscious, there's this sudden, nonlinear burst of widespread, reverberating neural activity. It's like the information catches fire and spreads through the workspace.
And you can see signs of that.
Yeah, researchers like Dehane have linked this ignition to specific electrophysiological signatures, like bursts of high-frequency gamma band oscillations that you can measure with EEG or MEG when someone becomes aware of something.
But boiling it down, IIT is about intrinsic structure and integrated information, maybe anywhere. GNWT is about function information broadcast within specific high-level brain networks. These seem fundamentally opposed in some way.
They really are, and this isn't just academic.
How does it affect looking for animal consciousness?
Well, it kind of predetermines who you even consider might be in the club of the conscious. IIT, being about intrinsic causal power, is inherently open to finding consciousness all over the place. An octopus, an insect. If their system integrates information in the right way, boom, consciousness. It supports a potentially very broad distribution.
Right.
GNWT, though, ties consciousness to a specific function, global broadcast, and often links it to specific architectures, like those long-range cortical networks. That makes its criteria much tighter. It suggests consciousness might be more of a cognitively elite club, maybe limited to mammals, some birds, animals with the right kind of brain wiring for that global broadcast.
So your starting theory heavily biases where you look and what you expect to find.
Absolutely. The theory you adopt sets the stage.
Okay, so now we have these frameworks, these theories. But how do we actually detect an inner world in an animal that can't just tell us about it? This is the huge hurdle, right? The problem of other minds.
That's the core challenge.
And there's always the danger of anthropomorphism, just projecting our own thoughts and feelings onto them because, I don't know, they look cute or seem smart.
Right, and science has to move beyond that guesswork. We need rigorous, evidence-based ways to infer what's going on inside.
How has the scientific view on this evolved? Because for a long time, talking about animal feelings was kind of taboo in science, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. For much of the 20th century, behaviorism dominated, and inner states were considered off-limits, unscientific. Discussing animal consciousness was often dismissed as sentimental anthropomorphism, but things have really shifted.
What changed?
A growing convergence of evidence from neuroscience, cognitive science, ethology, and this shift was really crystallized in a couple of landmark scientific statements. The first big one was the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness back in 2012.
What did that say?
It was pretty groundbreaking at the time. A group of prominent neuroscientists gathered and concluded, quite unequivocally, that the weight of evidence indicates that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness.
So the basic brain machinery isn't just human.
Right. They specifically pointed out that the neural networks for basic emotions and affective states are concentrated in evolutionarily ancient subcortical regions shared across many species. And they explicitly included all mammals and birds and many other creatures, including octopuses, as likely possessing consciousness.
Wow, octopuses even back in 2012. That's significant. And I know there was a more recent one just this year, 2024, the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness.
Yes, exactly. That built upon the Cambridge one and reflected even more progress in the field.
How did it expand on it? What was new?
It stated there's strong scientific support for conscious experience in birds and mammals, kind of reaffirming Cambridge, but then it went further. It said there's a realistic possibility of conscious experience in all vertebrates.
All of them. Fish, reptiles, amphibians.
A realistic possibility, yes. And crucially, it extended this to many invertebrates, specifically naming cephalopods like octopus and squid, decapod crustaceans like crabs and lobsters, and even insects.
Insects. Okay, that feels like a really big leap from the traditional view.
It is. It reflects a major shift in thinking.
So this isn't just adding more animals to the list. It sounds like the way scientists are thinking about the evidence has changed between those two declarations. What was the key conceptual shift?
That's exactly right. The Cambridge Declaration relied quite heavily on finding homologous brain structures we share with other animals due to common ancestry, especially those subcortical networks.
Like our amygdala is similar to a mouse's amygdala because our common ancestor had one.
Precisely. That's powerful evidence, but it makes it tricky when you look at animals with radically different nervous systems, like an octopus or a bee. They don't have those same structures. Their brains evolved independently.
So how did the New York Declaration include them?
It signaled a move towards accepting analogous evidence more strongly, looking for functional and behavioral markers that suggest conscious experience, even if the underlying neural hardware, the brain is totally different, evolved convergently.
So it's less about having the same parts and more about showing similar abilities or functional signatures that correlate with consciousness in us.
Exactly. It opens the door to studying consciousness in truly alien minds, moving beyond just comparing animals to ourselves based on brain similarity. It legitimizes the search much more broadly.
Okay, so if we're looking for these functional markers, how do scientists actually go about it in practice? What's the method?
The main approach is often called the marker method. It's pretty pragmatic, really. 2 steps.
What are they?
First, identify reliable markers associated with conscious awareness in humans. These can be behavioral markers, cognitive abilities, specific neural signatures, pharmacological responses, things we're confident link to consciousness in us because we have verbal rapport.
Okay, find the signs in humans.
Step 2. Systematically look for those same markers or clear functional analogs in non-human animals.
So if a certain brainwave pattern signals awareness in humans, you look for a similar pattern in, say, a crow doing a similar task.
Exactly. Or if a certain drug affects human conscious pain perception, does it affect an animal's response to injury in a way that suggests more than just a reflex?
But surely one marker isn't enough. Like you mentioned, language models can produce language.
Absolutely crucial point. No single marker is proof. A sophisticated AI might mimic some markers. The real strength comes from finding a battery of converging evidence.
Multiple independent signs pointing the same way.
Yes. If an animal shows complex decision-making, flexible behavior, evidence of affective states, and maybe some analogous neural correlates, the cumulative case becomes much stronger. It's like building a profile from many different data points, not just one smoking gun.
Right, building that puzzle piece by piece. So with all these methods and theories, what does it mean for that question people always ask? Are some animals more conscious than others? I feel like that question might be, well, maybe the wrong way to think about it.
Increasingly, yes. That question implies a single ladder, doesn't it? A linear scale, like the old Scala Naturae, the great chain of being, with humans obviously perched at the top.
Yeah, like consciousness is just one volume knob.
Right. But the evidence just doesn't support that simple picture. Consciousness seems much more multifaceted, a collection of different capacities that can vary independently across species.
So how are researchers thinking about it instead?
There's a growing consensus around a multidimensional framework, an idea championed by people like philosopher Jonathan Birch. Instead of a single ladder, think of it more like a multi-axis space, or maybe a dashboard with several different dials.
A consciousness profile.
Exactly. Each species has its own unique profile across different dimensions of conscious experience. It moves away from ranking and towards characterizing the nature of different minds.
Okay, what are some of these key dimensions then?
Birch and others highlight around 5 main ones. First, perceptual richness, or P-richness. This is about the detail, the vividness, the sheer bandwidth of an animal's sensory world.
Like how sharp is their vision? How many colors do they see? How complex is their sense of smell?
Precisely, and it's specific to each sense. A dog might have incredibly rich olfactory consciousness, but poorer visual richness compared to us.
Okay, P-richness. What's next?
Second, evaluative richness, or E-richness. This is about the spectrum of feelings, pleasures, pains, but also more complex emotions like fear, joy, maybe even grief or empathy.
How do you assess that?
Through sophisticated behavioral tests. Looking at motivational trade-offs, will an animal endure pain for a reward? How complex are their preferences? How do they respond to social situations?
Got it. Emotions and values. Third
is integration at a time, or unity. This asks about how unified an animal's conscious experience is at any given moment. Our human experience usually feels like a single integrated whole.
Right. I experience myself as one conscious entity.
But is that true for all animals? Think of an octopus with its semi-autonomous arms, or a bird whose brain hemispheres aren't as strongly connected as ours. Could they have multiple streams of consciousness? Or a less unified field? It challenges our assumptions.
Wow, yeah. Okay, dimension 4.
Integration across time, or temporality. This is about how consciousness is structured over time. Is it just a flow of present moments? Or does the animal have mental time travel?
Meaning?
The ability to consciously relive specific past events, episodic memory, or to imagine and plan for specific future possibilities. That requires a more complex temporal structure to consciousness.
Right, projecting yourself backward and forward in time. And the last one.
Finally, self-consciousness, or selfhood. This is the degree of awareness an animal has of itself as distinct from the world and other beings.
Like the mirror test.
That's one key marker, yes, mirror self-recognition. But it's likely a spectrum from basic body awareness and self-other distinction all the way up to recognizing oneself in a mirror and potentially even having a theory of mind, understanding that other individuals have their own minds, beliefs, intentions.
Okay, so perceptual richness, evaluative richness, unity, temporality, and selfhood. That's a much richer picture than just more or less conscious.
Exactly. It dissolves that ranking problem.
So instead of asking, is a crow more conscious than an octopus? Which is kind of meaningless.
Right.
You ask, what's the shape of a crow's consciousness profile? What's the shape of an octopus's? Maybe the crow scores super high on temporality, planning for the future, while the octopus forces us to question unity itself.
Precisely. It's a much more nuanced and, frankly, more scientifically interesting way to approach it. And it fits with evolution, with Darwinian thinking. You wouldn't expect evolution to produce just one type of mind on a single scale. You'd expect
A whole radiation of different minds adapted to different lives,
Yeah.
a variety of forms and functions of consciousness.
Exactly, an adaptive radiation of minds.
Okay, this is fascinating. Let's actually apply this framework now. Let's look at some specific animal groups and see what their consciousness profiles might look like based on the evidence. Where should we start? Maybe close to home. Primates. Great apes.
Good place to start. Great apes, chimps, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, they provide really strong evidence on several dimensions, especially selfhood. As you mentioned, they consistently pass the mirror self-recognition test.
They see the mark in the mirror and touch it on their own body.
Right. Suggesting they recognize the reflection as themselves. And there's the early work on language acquisition, like Washu the chimp learning American Sign Language.
I remember hearing about her combining signs, like waterbird for a swan.
Yeah, showing some level of mental representation and maybe even basic generativity, although obviously not full human language. But perhaps the most compelling recent evidence is for theory of mind.
Understanding other minds. How do they test that without language?
Clever nonverbal tests, often involving tracking where an ape looks. For example, they'll watch a scenario where an actor hides an object, then leaves, and the object is moved. The ape will reliably look towards the place where the actor falsely believes the object still is, anticipating where the actor will search.
So they understand the actor has a belief that's different from reality and different from their own knowledge.
It strongly suggests so, and other studies show they use their own recent experience, like whether they know a barrier is opaque or not, to judge what another individual can or cannot see. Bonobos have even been seen proactively communicating, like pointing out hidden food to a human they know didn't see it hidden.
That's amazing. So for apes, really high scores on selfhood, the mirror test, theory of mind, and also pretty strong temporality, given the memory and planning involved in some of these tasks and communication.
Agreed. A very strong profile, particularly in those areas.
Okay, what about animals that evolved complex intelligence totally separately from us? Let's look at convergent minds. Maybe cetaceans, dolphins, and elephants. Their lineages split from ours ages ago, over 90 million years, yet they have these huge brains and complex societies.
Fantastic examples of convergent evolution of intelligence and potentially consciousness. Let's take dolphins. Their brains are huge, second only to humans in terms of encephalization quotient, the brain-to-body size ratio.
And complex structures, too.
Very convoluted cortex. And significantly, they are one of the few non-primate groups to convincingly pass the mirror test. Some studies suggest they might even develop self-recognition slightly earlier in life than human kids or chimps do.
So high selfhood again.
Definitely. Plus, think about their social complexity. These incredibly intricate social networks, communication using individual signature whistles that function like names.
Like calling each other.
Essentially, yeah. And they have the longest social memory recorded outside of humans. They can remember the whistles of individuals they haven't seen for over 20 years.
Incredible.
And neuroanatomically, dolphin brains contain those specialized large neurons called spindle neurons or von Economo neurons. In humans and apes, these are concentrated in areas linked to social cognition, empathy, intuition.
And dolphins have them too, convergently.
Yes, suggesting similar neural tools evolved for similar complex social challenges.
What about elephants then? Another giant brain, complex society.
Elephants are just as stunning. They also pass the mirror test, another tick for selfhood. They show impressive general intelligence tool use, cooperative problem solving, legendary memory.
Right.
But where elephants arguably stand out most dramatically is on the dimension of evaluative richness.
Their emotional lives.
Profoundly so. There's just so much evidence, observational and experimental, for deep emotions. Empathy, comforting distressed individuals, apparent compassion, cooperation, and perhaps most famously, grief.
The stories about elephants mourning their dead, visiting grave sites.
Exactly. These aren't just anecdotes anymore. They're well-documented behaviors suggesting deep social bonds and powerful, effective responses to loss. And guess what? Their brains also have a massive hippocampus, crucial for memory and emotion.
Let me guess, spindle neurons.
They have those too. Again, convergent evolution. So for both dolphins and elephants, you see high selfhood and arguably exceptionally high e-richness. Their emotional and social worlds seem incredibly rich. Powerful examples of similar cognitive and affective peaks reach through entirely different evolutionary paths.
Amazing. Okay, let's shift gears dramatically to the birds. What about the feathered apes? Crows, parrots, these guys have tiny brains compared to mammals, structured completely differently, yet they do some incredibly smart things. A real challenge to old ideas.
A massive challenge. They force neuroscientists to rethink the idea that you need a layered cortex like ours for higher cognition. Take New Caledonian crows. They are master tool users and makers.
Not just using a twig, right?
Oh no. They manufacture complex tools from different materials, like making stepped tools out of leaves or bending wire found in the lab to create a hook to get food out of a tube, something they'd never encounter in the wild. That screams insight and planning.
So high cognitive ability. What about other dimensions, like temporality?
Birds like corvids, crows, jays, ravens really excel here. Western scrub jays are famous for their mental time travel abilities. They cache food, and they remember what they cached, where they cached it, and when they cached it.
Why does the when matter?
Because some food perishes. They preferentially retrieve perishable items like worms before non-perishable nuts, but only if enough time has passed for the worms to likely spoil. They're tracking the decay rate based on when they cached it. That's sophisticated, future-oriented thinking based on past memory.
Wow, that's planning.
And they even show a kind of theory of mind. If a scrub jay caches food while another jay is watching, it will often wait until the observer is gone, then go back and recache the food somewhere else, specifically if the observer was a known pilferer.
They know the other bird saw them, and they anticipate it might steal the food later, so they move it.
Exactly. It suggests they understand the other bird's perspective and intentions, and plan accordingly. That's high temporality and bordering on selfhood, Tom.
But is there evidence for the raw feeling, for peak consciousness in birds?
This was the big question for a long time. But a landmark study in 2020 provided really compelling direct neural evidence in crows.
What did they find?
They trained crows to report whether they saw a faint visual stimulus or not, and they found specific neurons in the crow's pallium, a brain area analogous in function to our prefrontal cortex, whose activity directly correlated with the crow's subjective report of seeing the stimulus.
Not just with the stimulus being present, but with whether the crow said it saw it.
Exactly. The neural activity reflected the crow's reported perception, even when the crow made a mistake, like reporting seeing a stimulus that wasn't there, a false positive. That's strong evidence for a neural correlate of their actual subjective, phenomenal experience.
That's huge.
It really is.
Yeah.
And you also have cases like Alex, the African gray parrot, who demonstrated understanding of abstract concepts like color, shape, number, even the concept of zero, and used language intentionally to request things or answer questions.
So for advanced birds, it looks like exceptionally high temporality, complex problem solving, which maps onto high A consciousness, and now really strong evidence for basic peak consciousness, the subjective experience itself.
That sums it up well. A very different brain, but a very sophisticated mind.
Okay, prepare for whiplash. From birds to something truly alien, the octopus. An independent experiment in evolving big brains and intelligence. These guys really force us to rethink everything, don't they?
They absolutely do. Talk about convergent evolution. Their last common ancestor with us was probably some tiny flatworm 600 million years ago,
Yeah.
yet they evolved large brains and remarkable intelligence completely separately.
And their nervous system is just bizarre from our
It's
perspective.
totally bizarre. It's highly distributed. About 3/5 of an octopus's neurons aren't even in its central brain. They're out in its 8 arms.
So the arms have minds of their own almost.
They have significant autonomy. An arm can perform complex actions like identifying food by touch and bringing it to the mouth, even if surgically separated from the central brain. This raises profound questions about unity.
Right. Is octopus consciousness a single unified field like ours seems to be? Or is it somehow fragmented? Maybe a central awareness plus 8 sort of semi-conscious arms. We just don't know.
It's a fundamental puzzle. But despite this alien organization, they are incredibly intelligent, masters of camouflage, changing skin color and texture instantly, brilliant problem solvers escaping from sealed jars, navigating complex mazes. They even show tool use, like carrying coconut shell halves around to use as portable shelters later.
Amazing. What about feelings? E-richness.
There's evidence there too. They show clear signs of pain avoidance and learning from painful experiences. They engage in behaviors that look an awful lot like play manipulating objects repeatedly with no obvious reward. And they seem to show individual personalities and preferences.
So the octopus profile is just unique. High intelligence, possible e-richness, but a massive question mark over unity. It really demonstrates why we need that multidimensional framework. You can't place it on a simple ladder.
Not at all. It demands we think differently about how minds can be organized.
Okay, one last stop on our tour, pushing right to the edge, the lower boundary. Affective states in insects. Traditionally, insects were seen as just tiny robots, pure reflex machines.
Right.
But that view is being challenged, right? Especially regarding evaluative richness. You mentioned the New York Declaration even included them.
Yes, this is a really active and sometimes controversial area of research. The key is trying to distinguish simple reflexes to harm nociception from genuine, subjective, negative feeling pain.
Like pulling your hand from a hot stove reflexively versus the feeling of being burned.
Exactly. And studies on fruit flies, for example, show behaviors that seem to go beyond simple reflexes. They'll learn to avoid places associated with electric shock. They show motivational trade-offs like enduring heat to get to high-value food. They'll even self-administer analgesics if injured. Some studies show they'll avoid eating capsaicin-laced food, even if starving, suggesting a strong negative internal state overrides basic survival drives.
So it's not just a knee-jerk reaction. Their behavior is modulated in ways that suggest an internal feeling state is influencing decisions.
That's the argument, yes. And bumblebees have shown similar motivational trade-offs, enduring unpleasant heat for a better sugar reward.
What about positive feelings? Is there evidence for insect happiness?
Happiness might be too strong a word, but there's growing evidence for positive affective states.
Yeah.
Bumblebees that get an unexpected tasty treat show more optimistic responses in subsequent tests. They're quicker to investigate ambiguous cues that might lead to reward.
Like a glass half full bee.
Sort of. And perhaps most surprisingly, there's research showing bumblebees seem to engage in play. They'll repeatedly interact with small wooden balls, rolling them, carrying them with no apparent external goal like food or mating. It looks spontaneous and intrinsically rewarding, just like play in mammals.
Wow, playing bees. That really challenges the insect as automaton idea. Is there any idea how their tiny brains could support even basic feelings?
Well, their brains are tiny but incredibly efficient and densely packed. Some theories propose that structures in the insect midbrain might be sufficient to support a basic, egocentric simulation of the world and their place in it, which could be the foundation for rudimentary subjective experience. It's still speculative, but plausible.
So the insect evidence points towards maybe a low but emerging score on the e-richness dimension, basic positive and negative feelings influencing behavior, pushing that lower boundary of where consciousness might exist.
Exactly. It suggests maybe consciousness didn't appear all at once, fully formed, but evolved gradually, with basic affective states appearing quite early on.
So let's try and wrap this incredible journey up, this deep dive across the animal kingdom. It just reveals this profound complexity, this amazing diversity of minds out there.
It really does.
And the evidence we've looked at, it just seems to overwhelmingly refute that old, simple idea of a single ladder of consciousness, right?
Completely. That linear hierarchy just doesn't fit the data. The most accurate picture, the one that science is increasingly pointing towards, is this multidimensional space. Each species has its own unique spot, its own consciousness profile.
Yeah, like we saw, apes might excel in theory of mind.
While corvids, the birds, show incredible temporality, future planning.
Elephants and dolphins with that amazing emotional depth, that E-richness.
The octopus challenging our whole concept of unity.
And even insects, possibly showing the beginnings of E-richness, those basic feelings.
It's a mosaic of different strengths and variations.
And this all really supports a Darwinian view, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Consciousness not as some mystical property, but as a biological adaptation, or maybe a set of adaptations.
Exactly. Something that has evolved, likely multiple times independently, convergently, because it helps animals solve complex problems in their environments.
Finding food, avoiding danger, navigating complex social lives.
Right. And these amazing abilities we see, self-awareness, planning, empathy, tool use, they aren't just rungs on a ladder leading up to us. They're more like different tools in an evolutionary toolkit. Different species evolved different combinations of tools depending on what they needed.
So the fact that these complex cognitive and affective traits pop up again and again in completely unrelated lineages
is powerful evidence that consciousness in its many forms is a robust and advantageous feature of life, not just some fluke that happened once in our lineage.
Which means the question, are some animals more conscious than others?
It's fundamentally flawed. It imposes our human-centric linear thinking onto something that's way more diverse and interesting than that.
So perhaps the real frontier, the truly fascinating question for the future, isn't if an animal is conscious, or even how much. It's asking, what is the specific nature of this animal's conscious world? What is it actually like to be a bat or an octopus or a bee, mapping those diverse inner worlds? That's the real adventure. And what we're finding is a spectrum of experience far richer, far more widespread than we ever used to imagine.
A truly exciting time for this research.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the world of animal minds.